Okay, in terms of the stuff, this is of course the last episode of this season, the 26th season, curriculum quarter. Never, we cancel Sunday. Deadlines remain unchanged, so exam 3, covering part 3, exam 4, covering part 4, quiz and assignments part 4, covering part 4. Deadline tomorrow, April 26th at 11:59 p.m. And exam number 5, the exciting final, covering all the themes. Deadline's Wednesday at 5 p.m. of finals week. And the great stuff to recap that, the quizzes are 30%, best 10 out of the whole bunch of quizzes count, regardless of where they come from, in the class of course. And you won't see Blackboard deleting them, or hiding them, or marking them as drop. It just does it in the calculation. So you won't see any change to the grades, but your overall grade will reflect that. Same deal with assignments, the best 10 assignments from all over the class. They're kept automatically. You won't see any dropped or deleted or marked as such. They'll just be calculated correctly. And then with the exams, the best 4 out of 5 count. Until you've done 4 of them, it will pull in zeros. Because anything you haven't done is graded as a 0, because that shows you your real-time overall grade, which is what you get if you just stopped at that point. To use an analogy, it's kind of like if you're working a job and you had like a little money bar showing like how much you'd make if you stopped at this point. That's kind of the way it is. It's not your average of what you've done. It's what you get if you just said, I'm done, no more stuff. And so I got panic emails from people, I guess I'm going to class, why is my grade so low? And the answer is, if you haven't done like exam 3 or 4, you'll be pulling into zeros, so your test grade would include 2 of those, so it could be no higher than 50. So that would look kind of bad. But once stuff is done, it swaps out the actual grade for the zeros. And then with the final, as mentioned before, if you look at your overall grade and it's an A, you're done, because you can't get more A than A, and nothing you can do in the course can lower your grade. If you do more stuff, it either stays the same, worst case, or improves, best case. So if you're satisfied with your overall grade and don't want to take the final, nothing is going to change. There's not going to be like some disaster where I start throwing zeros in there. The zeros are already in there. And taking the final may not help you. Thing to do is get the grade estimator, if you haven't got an A already, put in your best 3 exams, your overall quiz grade, overall assignment grade, hypothetical 100% for the final, and see if that boosts your overall grade up enough to move to the next letter grade. If, for example, you have an 81.2 and 100% of the final moves you to 82.4, then you still have a B, so it wouldn't change anything. Other stuff, the STAR quiz I mentioned before, the way that's done is you just go to the STAR survey site, click on the link. It's a very short survey we need for our assessment, and it's anonymous in the sense that I don't know who in particular does it, nor would it matter to me. It's not like I would go and seek revenge for doing the survey, but I keep it anonymous, because it's anonymous. And you just pick the class you're in, or classes, and I take the percentage of participation, and then add plus 10 percentiles, and that becomes your STARS quiz. And it's just another quiz, and it cannot hurt your grade. At worst, it leaves it the same. Ideally, of course, it will improve it. Maybe not much, but it is always either beneficial or neutral. The argument basic assessment instrument, short post-test to see your, how it compares to how you did on the ABI pre-test, and then there are the 2 surveys. And doing this assessment stuff can get you up to +2 on your overall grade. And so if you're within 2 points without the final, you can include that in your calculation. Not a guaranteed 2 points, but it caps at 2. And again, this cannot hurt your grade. None of this can hurt your grade. The worst case stays exactly the same. And of course, the most likely case results in improvement. So doing more stuff can never worsen your grade. It's either beneficial or neutral. Then, again, final deadline's on Wednesday, finals week at 5 p.m., and then all the grades will go into the iRattler thing, and then you'll see them when iRattler releases the grades. Also with the grades, as I mentioned before, I do the roundup, like if you have like a 70, not the weed killer, That would be terrible. If you have like a 79.2 or like 89.5, if you have an X 9.1 or higher, it rounds up. Blackboard doesn't do that, weirdly enough. I should probably check again, make sure the last time I checked, the start semester didn't do that. And so you won't see it on Blackboard. I'll have to manually round that up. So if you get to like 79.1, you've got the B, and you'll see that on iRattler. Likewise with I don't put it in an assessment category because that would mean that if I put that in there, then it would, if people didn't do stuff, they'd end up hurting their grade. Like if it was like 2%, it would knock their grade down if they didn't do it. So I don't want it to hurt people's grades, I want it to only benefit them, so this is also manual. You wouldn't see this on Blackboard. You'll see this, but you won't see this until the grades are in iRattler, because getting extra credit to work in Blackboard is a nightmare, and I'm afraid it would like screw stuff up terribly, and I don't want to have stuff screwed up. A little more than usual. Okay, so that's all the grady stuff. Before going to the contenty stuff, anything about the grady stuff or any mysteries that remain? Okay. Unfortunately, all people are going to email me they're not here, so I'll still get hundreds of emails asking about this. Okay, so we finished up looking at the dreaded truth-functional logic, and we saw the truth of the whole depends on the truth of the parts. We looked at all of the sundry tables, etc. And our end game, of course, was the test for validity. And we saw how to do that. Now we turn to, essentially today is a recap of part 4, to go through and look at more examples to see how this stuff works, give you a chance to ask questions about anything relating to exam 4, deadlining tomorrow, or exam 5, if you need it, deadlining on the Wednesday. So we began our adventures in chapter 8 with categorical logic, the logic of cats, and many other things as well. And the essential idea is basically this illustrates how it's done. Also, bonus, this is one of the assignments. So if you haven't done this assignment yet, you'll get all the answers, so it's basically a free, or if you haven't turned it in, you can go back and do it. I don't remember the exact number, but it is definitely one. It'll be the 811 one, so it'll be one of the ones here at the end. So this will be some of the answers to that. And if you haven't submitted it yet, you can go and do it and get the 5 points. So this is exercise 811, number 5. Every voter is a citizen, but some citizens are not residents. Therefore, some voters are not residents. Now, we're doing the categorical stuff, as we saw back in those ancient days. The categorical syllogism is syllogism, so it's got 3 parts. 2 premises, 1 conclusion. It also has 3 terms, the minor, major, middle, and the way we do the translation is we put it into standard form, the premise, conclusion, and then what we do is we have to put the stuff in the right slots. So how do we tell? Well, the first thing is getting it into from normal, semi-normal English to symbolic form, or to categorical form. And that means everything we say in there is going to be an all S or P, no S or P, some S or P, some S or not P claim, with the S and P replaced by actual, in our case, English words. And in some cases, it's pretty easy. We got, for example, every voter is a citizen. Every means all, so that becomes all voters are citizens. The next one is some citizens are not residents. Well, all we have to do to that one is just strike the but, and we get some citizens are not residents, already standard form. And lastly, some voters are not residents, also already standard form, so super simple. The next step is deciding where stuff goes. Now, one option is just guessing. Once you get down to 3 claims, and every categorical syllogism is going to have just 3 claims, 2 premises, 1 conclusion, you can just, if you just randomly stuff them in there, you'll get at least 1 right, and you get a 50-50 shot of getting the other one right, because there's only 2 premises, 1 conclusion, so just guessing gives you a decent shot. But of course, guessing's not the best option, and so how do you tell? Well, one thing to look for, going back to the ancient days of part 1, is they're often what's called indicator words. And you can think of them as analogous to tracks on the ground, like if you're looking for animals to photograph them, or analogous to like, signs or, marks on arrows pointing in the direction of something. And of course the tracks don't guarantee that you're going to find the animals you're looking for, and the arrows along, say, a course on a 5K don't guarantee you'll stay on course, but if you follow them, you'll probably end up where you're supposed to be. Likewise, indicator words tend to indicate premises and a conclusion. And therefore, is pretty much a standard conclusion indicator. Not always. People sometimes, misuse it. People they just say therefore for no apparent reason, but it gives us the conclusion in this case. So put it in a standard form, we get all voters are citizens, some citizens are not residents, so some voters are not residents. Then, once we have it in standard form, and it always looks like, this structure, premise, conclusion, we have to decide whether it's valid or invalid. Now, the way to do that is, well, it's basically 3 ways. Well, 4 actually. One is guess, 50-50, not terrible odds. Second way is, there are 72 valid syllogisms, as I recall from my freshman logic class. And if you happen to recognize it as being a structure you already know as being valid, then it's going to be valid, because valid is always valid. The third way is the Venn diagram. Fourth way is the rules method. Oh, there's also a fifth way. There's the Euler diagrams we didn't go over, but if you happen to have taken a math class dealing with this stuff, and you know the way of the Euler, then you can use those as well. So when you're doing the diagram, you always got the 3 circles, and the S, P, and M, and then you got to know what do my circles correspond to. The way to tell is you gaze upon your completed argument, and if it's in correct form, then you look at the conclusion. The subject of your conclusion is your S term, the predicate conclusion is the P term, and the thing that doesn't occur in the conclusion is your M, your middle term. And so voters is S, residents is P, and citizens is M. Then you diagram premise 1, premise 2, and then with a conclusion, you look upon your handiwork and see whether it is shown or not. So premise 1, all voters are citizens would be all S or M. So when you do the all, it's always shaded. It's always the crescent or cookie with the bite out of its shape. And when you're shading, either all or no, you ignore the third circle. Again, because if you stopped here, you'd be saying all S are M except those that are P, but we're not saying that. All the S's are M, which means that those here are also M, so shade on through. Second, some citizens are not residents. With the some claims, we place the X. And with the X, it's got to go and live in a definite place, or it's got to float. So premise 2, some citizens are not residents. Residents is a P term, citizens is the M term. So we have to place it somewhere where it is both M and not P. So it could be here, that's M, but not P, but it could also be here, because that's M, but not P. It's also S, but we don't know. It could be this, we don't know. So we have to float the X. In this case, I just put the X on the line, and it says it could be here, don't know. And that is our old friend, the floating X. Then the final step is to gaze upon one's work, admiring it for a second, and then of course looking to see if the conclusion is shown. So the idea is, if you were to go mark the conclusion, which you don't, then there wouldn't be a change. It'd already be there, roughly speaking. So what we need to see is some voters are not residents, some S are not P. Now it could be true, because it could be here, but it could be here. And with validity, it can't be like a could, it's got to be a must. As you recall, the definition of validity is such that if all the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. And we look upon this, and we see that all the premises could be true, which we illustrated by the shading and Xing, but our conclusion need not be true. So we could have all true premises and a false conclusion, so this argument would be invalid, shown by the diagram. Before moving on to our next exciting slide, anything about this, or the process that needs more stuff, or more circles? This is also an assignment, so more points. From 812 from the book, this one shows that you can sometimes have two correct translations. Now, there, of course, if the translation is correct, they're both going to be valid or they're both going to be invalid. So you couldn't have like two correct translations, one valid, one invalid. They got to always be, you know, truth function equivalent. But depending whether you go positive or negative, it can, you know, look differently. So we have from 812, a few compact displayers use 24 times sampling, so some of them must cost at least $50, because you can't buy a machine with 24 times sampling for less than 50. Interesting enough, when the textbook first came out, the number was much higher, because when it first came out, that was the start of, back in the 90s, it was the start of CD players, and it was like $250. It keeps getting lower. It should probably be like $10 or $20 now, or maybe higher, because sometimes obsolete tech costs more. So as always, the way we translate it is we got to have two premises, one conclusion, as always, and as we'll see, we could go positive or negative. Namely, depending on how we use, you know, cost at least $50. We could take it to be they don't cost under 50, which is a way of saying they cost over 50, or we can say they cost more than 50. So there's actually two equivalent ways to say it in English. And as long as they're equivalent, then you're saying the same thing. So let's go with the first one is negative. First premise would be some compact displayers are players that use 24 times sampling. Premise 2, no players that use 24 times sampling are players that cost under 50. Conclusion, some compact displayers are not players that cost under 50. Now, as always, we need to find our SP and M terms, and it always works the same way. You look upon the argument, if it's been done correctly, the conclusion is the key. The subject of your conclusion is your S term, the predicate the P term, and the term that occurs not in your conclusion, but in your premises is your M term. So, as you can see, my Venn diagrams are obsolete. It used to be 100 with 8 times sampling. But it updated to, back in 2011, it dated up to 24 times sampling and down to $50. So we diagram premise 1. Some compact displayers are players use 24 times sampling. So the X would be initially floating, but we go to premise 2. No players that use 24 times sampling are players that cost under 50. So shaped. And then we look upon it, we need to see that some S are not P, and we gaze upon it and we see, aha, there we go. There's our X, so valid. Now, because of the way English works, we can do it positively. So the alternative translation, which is also correct, is some compact displayers are players that use 24 times sampling, so that's the same. And the change up is with the second premise and the conclusion. Instead of going negative, we go positive. So all players that use 24 times sampling are players that cost more than 50. Conclusion, some CD players are players that cost more than 50. And so we diagram premise 1 the same way. The X will be floating here. But then we go to premise 2 and we do it all instead of no. Again, because in English you can say if nothing is under $50, that's the same thing as saying that it's over $50 or all over $50. So we do the all shading. We shade all this, the X to floats, and our conclusion is some CD players are players that cost more than 50, and there it is. So even though the diagrams, they obviously look different, they both showed it to be valid. And so these are two ways to translate it. It just so happens again that with English, presumably with many other languages as well, you can say the same thing, either positive or negative. And as I mentioned before, this is also an answer to one of the assignments, so 3 points. Well, not really free, because you didn't show up. Or watch the tape. Before going to the next example, anything about this that needs more stuff? Now, what about a translation from, scratch, so to speak, going from like semi-normal English, getting it into categorical form? And so here's a argument in semi-normal English. So I was talking to Bill the other day, and he told me that he's a runner. People run, at least if they have any sense, own at least one pair of running shoes. So I'm sure that Bill has a pair of running shoes. Now, going from the normal-ish English to standard form, the steps are basically this. One thing is, as I mentioned, if you're one of the gifted logic hounds, you can just, sniff out the logic, so to speak. Then you just look at it and like, aha, here we go. Or here's premise 1, premise 2, done. But what if you want to be cautious? In that case, it's a matter of essentially grinding it. And the way to grind is this. First thing to do is look for what I call conversational blah blah. They're words that we say that really don't do anything, logically speaking. We often use them as kind of like, to say empty words while our brain is thinking what we're going to actually say. Instead of saying like, we have words that just kind of do that. And also when we're talking, we have a lot of words in there that don't do much, but we just kind of put them in there, kind of window dressing. So we have to see, does it actually do anything? And so, like I was talking to Bill the other day, it gives a context for time, but it really doesn't do anything in the argument. So, also, we look for a conversational blah blah, so one thing would be, is it stuff that we just say that really doesn't do anything? Also, we'll look for repeats. In terms of the terms that we need, we're going to have 3, the S, P, and N, and each one has to occur at least twice. It can occur more than twice, because it could be repeated in ways that are not used in the argument, but anything that doesn't occur twice can be part of the argument, because we've got to have 2 premises, 1 conclusion, 3 terms, each occurring twice. So kind of the first, purge would be, again, conversational blah blah. Like I was talking to Bill the other day, look at that as just like setting the stage. Also, we'd want to check, does it get used again? Because anything that's going to be in the argument has got to occur twice, because every term occurs twice. And talking to Bill the other day doesn't occur twice. So that's it. At least if they have any sense, well, it seems like conversational blah blah. Also, it doesn't get used more than once, so that's it. And also words like, I'm sure that's just conversational blah blah, because rather than saying I'm sure that, you just make the claim, so that stuff's out. So we'd have stripped out that conversational blah blah. Then we have to decide what are the terms, what things occur multiple times. Well, we've got Bill, that occurs multiple times, so potential. Bill being a runner, so runner occurs multiple times. And we also, of course, when people talk normally, they don't use the precise term over and over again, typically. And in many ways, because if you sort of tediously stick to the same term and never switch it, it gets kind of conversationally tedious. So being a runner and being people who run, same thing. Different words, of course, but they mean the same thing. So we got that. Then we have owning running shoes, so there's our terms. We got Bill being 1, runners being 1, owning shoes being our 3rd, so we have the 3 that we need. Each one occurs twice, so check, check, check. Once we've got our stuff, pulled out, and we've got our 2 premises and 1 conclusion, or conclusion potentially, then we have to decide where they go. And again, this could be done by guessing, because if you got the 3 parts, and you just kind of, pin the tail on the donkey, so to speak, and just stuff them in there, then you're guaranteed to get at least 1 right, just by chance, and then the other one's 50-50. So guessing, pretty good odds, but not the best odds. So the thing to do is, what you look for is, as I mentioned before, indicator words. So typically indicates a conclusion. Things like, therefore, so, consequently, in conclusion. They tend to indicate conclusions, not always. And things like because, or for the reason that, or the evidence is, or my premise is, tend to indicate premises. But those aren't always guaranteed, because sometimes people use terms meaninglessly. Years ago I knew someone who used the term consequently, just constantly, just for no reason. Everything was consequently. You just say something like, consequently breakfast. I'm like, what is that? What does that mean? What does that even mean? And it meant nothing. I assumed too many drugs or something. So how do we get up into the standard form stuff? Well, consequently, it looked like this. Now we also have a complication here, because when we're dealing with individuals, we have to do that kind of weird thing where we turn an individual into a category. And we do this sort of jury rig thing where we say all people identical to Bill are people who run. Just like we do if we were talking about Tallahassee is a city, we'd say all cities identical to Tallahassee are cities. And again, it's kind of awkward and lame, but it's all part of the logic. So if we're dealing with an individual, we wouldn't use some, because that would be like some Bill, or that would work. And you just use identical to all, whatever it is identical to this, or no, whatever it is identical to that, that's what you use. So laid out in standard form, we'd have premise 1, all people identical to Bill are people who run. Premise 2, all people who run are people who have their own running shoes. And conclusion, all people identical to Bill are people who have their own running shoes. So you have guided by or so, probably the conclusion. Now if you're not sure, like if there's no indicator words, again, guessing is always an option, because you're going to get one guaranteed right, and the other one is 50-50. So guessing is not terrible. What you will look for, of course, is try to get the structure. You want to kind of look at how does it fit together. And ideally, you want to try to get it through to see if it could be valid. Because if it's valid, it will all fit together in a sensible way. If it's invalid, it won't work, but it may still look kind of sensible. So in this case, we got all people identical to Bill are people who run, and all people who run are people who have shoes. All people identical to Bill are people who have own running shoes, and it all kind of fits together. You kind of get the fit. Now again, like with any skill, it's something that requires practice. And so the more you do this stuff, the easier it is to sort of sense where it fits and where it doesn't. I like to use an analogy. If judging distances, in sports, when playing the sports with the ball, you get better and better at judging, how to hit the tennis ball or sink in the basket. Same with this, same kind of thing. You just kind of get a feel for how things should go together. And of course, the other way is just trying to put it together and see what you get. And if it doesn't work, then keep trying. There's not too many options. Keep trying the different options until you get something that seems to kind of make sense. So we get into standard form, and then of course, the question is it valid or not? So here's how we do it. So to know what the S and P and M are, that's always kind of the key to doing these things. So we got to put together the standard form. You gaze upon the conclusion. The sum of your conclusion is your S term. The predicate of your conclusion is your P term. And the leftover, sad, tragic leftover, is the M term. Then you diagram premise 1, premise 2, and then you look upon the magnificence of your work and judge it. So premise 1, we have all people identical to Bill are people who run. So all S are M, so shade, shade, shade. And again, when we're shading, we ignore the other circles. We just shade on through because we're talking about all or none. And the third circle does not matter. Secondly, we get all people who run or people who have our own running shoes. And again, when we're shading, we just shade on through, so shade, shade, shade. And then the last thing to do, of course, is look upon the work and see if the conclusion is shown. So if you were to mark the conclusion, which you don't, there wouldn't be, it would already be there. You wouldn't, alter the results. So we're looking for all S are P, so it would be this shaded. Yeah, we got this thing here, of course, but it still works because everything that's S that's left is also a P. So if we were to shade that in, we would just be shading over shade, be double shade. And so we'd end up with the same result, and so this would be valid. Now also with guessing, with checking for validity, I got it multiple ways. And guessing is always an option because it's, if you have no idea, just flip a coin because 50-50 shot. Before moving on, anything about this? It needs more stuff. Now what about one that's more complicated and annoying? Well, glad you asked for that. Here's both. So this is conversationally, kind of normal-ish. We have the following. It's often said that all creatures with blood are either cold-blooded or warm-blooded. It is well known that every non-mammal is a non-cat. Of course, it is also known that all mammals are non-cold-blooded things, so it must be concluded that not a single cat is cold-blooded. The same is true of dogs. Now, kind of the first sweep through, the first stage of the purge, is getting rid of conversational blah blah. And that basically you ask yourself, is this doing anything in terms of being a premise or a conclusion? If the answer is no, then it's got to go. So things like it's often been said, that's just blah blah, it's well known that, blah blah of course is blah blah, and so it must be concluded is actually useful, namely if whoever's saying this is using the term correctly, they're pointing to the conclusion, but of course you wouldn't use, it's not part of the actual argument. So useful, but still wouldn't be in the argument. And so that clears up some stuff. Second thing to do is go through with the purge on the, if it doesn't repeat, I can't think of a cool rhyme, sorry about that. If it doesn't repeat, it's not going to be in there. So we've got creatures of blood, either cold or warm. We do get cold, but we don't get warm again, so that goes. We've got mammal, that gets repeated, so could be in there. Got cold-blooded, that gets repeated, so could be in there. We got cats, that gets repeated. So we have three terms. We have cat, cold-blooded, mammal. And then we have the same is true of dogs thrown in there, but then our rule is it's got to occur, twice. Otherwise, it doesn't get used. So this one goes. And so that brings us down to the required 3 claims, and we get the 3 terms repeated twice, 3 claims. And then it's just a matter of stuffing them into the right slots. Now, this one is a little more complicated because it's got the non-stuff, non-mammal, non-cat, and then we've got cat and cold-blooded. So we got all kinds of nons going on. Now, to get to normal form, we can't have any nons in there because standard form is all SRP, no SRP, some SRP, some SR, non-P. And we can't have like all non-S or non-P. So we got to get it into standard form. And as you might recall from the ancient days of earlier on, the rules that we have, conversion, obversion, and contraposition, their sole function is to get from non-standard to standard. So to know which rule to use, you have to look at what you got and why it's not standard, and then you apply the rule. So one way to do this is to just do it automatically. Again, people who are like logic hounds, they just look at it, they just know, aha, that's, you know, all non-mammals are non-cats. That's just all cats are mammals, and they just automatically do it. Now, if you want to be cautious and go through it step by step, or if, you know, you're not a logic hound, you don't just see it automatically, then you go through these steps. So this would become all non-mammals are non-cats. And second premise would be all mammals are non-cold-blooded things. The conclusion would be no cats are cold-blooded. Now again, we have to put it in standard form, and all non-S are non-P, not standard. All you know, S are non-P, also non-standard. So what do we do? Well, we get those three rules. We've got the conversion, which flips the subject and predicate. In this case, the problem is doesn't require conversion, because it's not that the subject and predicate are in the wrong place, it's that they're in the wrong place and they're both negated. So we need something that flips and de-negates. And of course that's composition. That's literally what it does. You switch the subject and predicate and then negate each of them. Or to reverse it, you switch them and then you non-nons, which makes them positive. So all non-mammals are non-cats contraposes to all cats are mammals. So standard form. All mammals are non-cold-blooded things. Well, in this case, we've got the parts in the right place, but we've got a negative we've got to get rid of. And when we've got the parts in the right place, but we have to get rid of a negative, then we use aversion. Because aversion, which applies to all four claim types, takes the predicate, negates it, and then essentially reverses the polarity of the whole claim. All becomes no, some are becomes some are not, and vice versa. So all mammals are non-cold-blooded things, not standard form, though when you avert it, then it becomes no mammals are cold-blooded things. And so goes to standard form. Now again, if you take like the logic class, the next kind of series, you may, like if you take a test, you may have to go and do like step by step, like okay, direct translation, apply the rule, etc. But if you can just see it and just go straight to the standard form, there's no requirement to like show your work, so to speak. That's fine. It saves you some time. Although sometimes as a practical matter, it can be good to check because just to make sure that you're seeing it right. So this would be the standard form. Then the question, of course, is it valid? Before answering that burning question, anything about this? I need some more stuff. So we get our premises laid out. And looking upon it, again, the key to the categorical claims is always looking at the conclusion. If the argument is in correct form, this will always be your S term, that's always your P term, and the sad, tragic leftover is your M term. So we start off with our finely crafted Venn diagram, S circle, P circle, M circle. Then we go to our first premise, no mammals are cold-blooded, and it look like this, no S or M. And again, the shading only has two shapes. There's the crescent and the football. There's never like, cookie with double bites or half footballs, etc. And there used to be like a website that had all like the craziest of Venn diagrams. One of the best, I think, was one person doing the final. They spent their whole time, 2 hours for the final, doing a cartoon, The Adventures of Venn Man. Very good. They just like, I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm just going to cartoon for a while. But a pretty funny cartoon. I mean, philosophically funny, which is not funny at all. Next is, of course, diagram premise 2. And that is no mammals are cold-blooded things. So that would be diagramming here. And again, when you're doing the all, it's always the cookie with a bite out of it or crescent shape, and the no is always the football. It's always here, between P and M or between S and M. And then the final step is to look upon it and see if it's valid or not. And again, in telling validity, there's the guess method, 50-50. There's the one we just used, the Venn diagram method. There's the Euler method. There's the rules method. And there's also if you recognize the structure, because again, there's only a finite number of valid categorical claims, you might just say, hey, that's the same as this other one I did. It's that one is valid, this is valid too. So looking at it, we need no SRP, which is here, and voila, it is valid. Again, because when you look upon it, we already see our conclusion displayed. Okay, final categorical example, hopefully. It is well known from biology that not a single mammal is a creature that lacks a developed spine. Spines are, of course, composed of bone and contain an important part of the nervous system. So it is obvious that all creatures with spines have some sort of nervous system. It can be concluded that each mammal has some sort of nervous system. Now in this, we get all kinds of stuff going on. We got mammal, gets repeated multiple times, etc. And again, we have to run through our purge. So first purge is getting rid of the conversational blah blah, like it's well known from biology. And then we have to, of course, weed out things that don't repeat. So we've got spines repeating, we've got nervous system repeating, we got mammal repeating, but also we've got spines repeating quite a bit. So we have to get down to 3 claims. So even though we've got things that are occurring at least twice, some of them are occurring more than twice. We can only have 3 claims, 2 occurrences at each term. So that should be more purging. So in that case, what you look for is the structural stuff. Namely, again, you're trying to fit it together. So, the first premise, connects to the second premise, giving you the conclusion. So you have to kind of figure out what's going to go where. And one thing that can be a guide, of course, again, is the indicator words. So if they're being used correctly, this is probably the conclusion. Now, if you can find the conclusion, which is a good thing to look for, that can, and it's a thing that people most tend to indicate. People generally, if they're going to indicate anything, they would generally tend to use a term like so or therefore for the conclusion. Not always, but that's generally a good point to build from. Because if you can find one piece for sure, and that's usually the conclusion, then if it's a conclusion, you can kind of backward engineer it. Or if you get a definite premise, you can kind of use that as well. So once you can find one of them for sure, then you can get the rest. And again, the conclusion is kind of the most important to find. So we can build from this. It can be concluded, so it would be each mammal has some sort of nervous system. So what we can do is try, well, let's assume that's our conclusion. Then that's our S term and that's our P term. So looking at the rest of what we got, we need something that connects the 2 of these, and we find that, namely the spines. So we'll need something with mammal and spine, and something with spine and nervous system. So that gives us our parts. And then we put them into the right places. And again, once you get the 3 parts, if they're correct, you'll get guaranteed at least one of them right, because there's only 3 slots. You'll have 3 things. 2 of them are premise slots, so at least one part will be in the right place. Now, this, of course, does also require the application of one of the rules. We have no mammals or creatures without developed spines, but our term has developed spines. So we've got a negation, the without, and we got mammals. And so what we do is we got to get this to being positive, and our rule for switching one thing negative to positive is aversion. If we have to do 2 things, negative to positive, it's composition. And if it doesn't require, if it just requires flipping stuff, then it's conversion. So inverted becomes all mammals are creatures that have developed spines. And then premise 2 would be all creatures that have developed spines, or creatures that have some sort of nervous system. And conclusion, all mammals are creatures that have some sort of nervous system. Then, lastly, we've got the argument in standard form, so we build the Venn diagrams. Premise 1 is this, so all S are M. Premise 2, all M are P, and we've seen this, seen this before. So we look at the conclusion, all S are P, and there we go. And this one also shows how we've seen the same form before, and it's not surprisingly same form, so it's always valid. And done. So now we turn from chapter 8 to chapter 9. Before doing that though, anything about 8, any of the categorical stuff that needs more cat or gorical. Okay. Chapter 9, the truth-functional logic. Now, the end game for truth-functional logic is, of course, to get it into symbolic form. And as we saw back in the ancient days of before time, the standard form consists only of claim variables, connectives, and parentheses. So if there's still any English words in there, it's gotta be wrong. You can only have these things. Now, doing a full conversion would involve starting off first with semi-normal English, and then you'd get the variables and what they mean. And the way to tell whether you're doing a categorical or truth-functional translation is, well, if the test is being written properly, which are, you would tell you, like, this is truth-functional or categorical. Although if you take a logic class, part of it might be, the challenge might be figuring out, is it categorical or is it truth-functional? Now, one of the kind of the giveaways is, to be truth-functional, the question really should include what variables you're supposed to use. And the reason why that's kind of important is a purely practical thing, because if you don't say, here's the variables to use, people can kind of pick their own, and they can be right, even if they do it differently from what was intended. Sometimes it can work out that way. So anybody who's been teaching logic stuff for a while will always do this, because they've learned the nightmare of not doing this. So P is the first party who fails to fulfill the contract. And also what you want to look for, this is especially important, the variables are being given, is you can, if you're consistent, you can take something negative and just put it into the positive variable. So if you make P fails to fulfill the contract, that's P, and not P would be fulfilling it. So that's the thing to watch for. What does the variable actually stand for? Q is the second party is entitled to a refund, and R is the second party is entitled to a replacement product. Now, when doing the truth-functional translation, the steps are somewhat similar, but truth-functional translations are actually much harder for the following reasons, as we'll see. Now, the first thing, just like with categorical syllogisms, is you clear out the conversational blah blah. In this case, there is none. Everything there is actually important. Second thing is, unlike the truth-functional, the categorical logic, there's no fixed number of premises. There's always one conclusion. So there's always one conclusion. Number of premises, no set amount, unless you're told in the question how many premises they're supposed to be. But otherwise, unless, you know, the question says, you know, what are the three premises in the conclusion, it could be any number. And one that makes it even more challenging is that a sentence is not the same thing as a claim. So you could actually have multiple claims in a single sentence. So you might have, you know, three premises in one sentence, you know, where you get the period, and in there are jammed in three claims. So you have to watch for the fact that a sentence is not a claim, and you get multiple claims in a single sentence. Also, again, so one thing is always on conclusion, but no set number of premises. Categorical claims, always two premises. Also, with categorical claims, you only have three terms. They get repeated twice. With truth-functional logic, anywhere, you know, there'll be at least two to build an argument, shortly, but no upper limit. I mean, there's a practical limit, you know, no one is going to put like 100 terms on a test unless they're psychotically evil, but there could be any number of terms in there. Now again, if the question is set up where they give you the variables, then you know how many terms you've got going on there. So that can be something of a plus. So with the truth functional claims, you can't go with the repeat rule because they don't have to repeat, you know, twice. Could be any number of premises, or always just one conclusion, so that makes it tougher. So you could have like 5 premises, 1 conclusion. And of course with categorical claims, it's always, you know, there's only 4 sentence types. With the truth functional logic, infinite number of potential sentences. So much more challenging. Now the way to do it, again, one way is, of course, some people can just see the logic. So there are people who just look upon the English and just be like, okay, yeah, this is P and Q, blah, 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 done. What about the grind method? Well, again, here's how the grind goes. First thing to do is, using this as your guide, is you swap out the English for the claim variables. So P is the first party field for the contract, so that goes in there. Then Q is the second party is entitled to refund, that goes in there. And then likewise for the P, so you swap out all the English for the claim variables. Then you'll have a bunch of stuff, you know, claim variables with the connectives in English. Then the next step there is to take that and replace it with the symbols. So for example, if we take the first sentence there, we've got if the first party fails to fill the contract, so if P, the second party is entitled to a refund, so that would be Q. Or a replacement product of equivalent value, and that would be R. So kind of the first step in the grind is swapping out the English for the claim variables. So that greatly reduces the amount of stuff there. We go from, you know, if the first party fails to fill the contract, then the second party is entitled to a refund or replacement product of equivalent value. We get to if P, then Q or R. Next step in the grind is to get rid of all the English, replacing it with the connectives. And that step is usually not too bad because the words indicating connectives in English, they are, you know, things we normally use, like or, if, then, and. So it becomes this, because if then is the arrow thing, or is the V thing, and then of course we have to decide where the parentheses go. So the last step is perhaps the trickiest because we have to kind of make a judgment. What is it, what's being said? And the way to do that is, well, try placing them and see what it says. Now if we put it here, P then Q or R would be saying, if the first party fails to fill the contract, then they get the refund, or they just get a replacement, which would be kind of weird, because this could be that you might just get a replacement just because, even if everything is done properly. So they don't, that's not what is meant. What makes sense is it's saying that if the first party fails, then there are two options. Either, refund or replacement. So that makes sense. So if they don't do the contract, you get this. The other way doesn't make sense. And then that would be done. And then what you do is you would grind through the rest of it until you have all your parts. And then you try to assemble the argument. Now, since you don't know how many premises there are, unless the question says, hey, there are 4 premises, you have to kind of work out what's part of the argument and what's just like in there. And there can be cases where stuff is just in there that doesn't do anything with the argument. So you have to decide, does it fit? The thing to do is look for, connections. Does it actually, serve as a premise? Does it lead to the conclusion? So, fully symbolized, it would look like this. P then Q or R, P, Q, or R. And so those are the sort of step-by-step approach. Swap out the English with the clean variables, grind 1. Step 2, swap out the English with the connectives. Then final step is putting in the parentheses. And then once you have everything symbolized, then it's a question of deciding which are premises, which are conclusion. Now, if you're not sure, again, guessing is an option, because if you just throw everything in there and make one thing the conclusion, everything but one is going to be a premise. So just guessing, assuming you get all the parts, you're just working premise and conclusion, can work. Less than ideal though. But to find the conclusion, what you do is you look for, first, indicator words. Has the person been nice enough to, put out some signals? In this case, yeah, you get a so. Probably the conclusion. If there's no indicator words or it's still not terribly clear, the thing to do is look for structure. What would make sense? Now, if the argument is invalid, then that can be a bit of a problem because invalid arguments, by their nature, don't work. Valid arguments are easy to translate because they fit together and have to make perfect sense. So those are kind of the grinding techniques to get through the translation. And then when you're done, you would have the premises, however many there are. In this case, there happen to be 2. And of course, the conclusion. Another example. This one brings in our friend, the sufficient condition. So we have the payment of fees is sufficient to become a member of the club. Either Bill pays his fees or he will not, and he'll do something else. Unless he becomes a member of the club, he will do something else. Bill didn't do something else, so he's in the club. So in this case, again, we'll have what the variables stand for, and the thing to do in the first step is swap out the English for the variables. And this also is the advantage of sort of simplifying things, so that way you get a better view of the structure. So the first sentence would be the payment of fees is sufficient to become a member of the club. So we have to go back to what is sufficient. And as you might recall, the sufficient condition gives you the antecedent. So if A is sufficient for B, then it's if A, then B. The necessary condition is always your consequent. So if A is necessary for B, then it would be if B, then A. And if it's necessary and sufficient, then you get this thing. So the first sentence, sufficient is, gives us our antecedent. Member of a club is Q, so it's just P and Q. The second premise, either he'll pay his fees or he won't, and he will do something else. So that would be P, or he won't, not P, and do something else, that's R. And we decide where the parentheses go, and so it would be, well, either he pays, or he won't, and he'll do something else, so most likely like that. And then so on and so forth. Now the unless, of course, is one of our problematic translation things. Now the easy way to deal with it is unless, again, gives you the, the conditional with the negation in it, or if you want to avoid all that stuff, you can just do, in this case, it would be the disjunction, which is easier to deal with. So, translated, we end up with this. If P then Q, P or not P and R, this would be the unless, not Q then R, not R or Q. Now premise 3 could also be Q or R, because when you're doing the unless translation, also works that way. So from this little, bit of stuff, we end up with 4 premises and a conclusion. So a lot of stuff going on in there. Now again, depending on, in the future, if you take the logic class, you may know how much stuff you're supposed to find there. It might, actually have on the test sheet, slots for, 4 premises and conclusion, or it may just be, no, it may just be like a whole bunch of, just like whatever it takes type of deal. Now, if you know how much is in there, that's obviously easier. But if you don't, and of course in real life, people generally, you wouldn't be reading an article where it says, hey, by the way, I used 4 premises and 1 conclusion. You'd have to figure out, on your own, what are the arguments, what are the premises, etc. Also, in outside of sort of crafted assignment questions and test questions, you could have multiple arguments jammed into paragraphs. And so not only would you be looking for an argument, you'd have to be looking for the possibility of other arguments in there. Hopefully the person is a good writer, they'll make it clear and separate their arguments out. But if someone's like not so great, you could have all kinds of stuff jammed in there. The worse someone is at writing, obviously, the harder it is to pull out what is going on. So once you get stuff translated, the end game for the truth functional logic is it valid or not? So we go through all that stuff to decide, is our argument valid or invalid? And the definition, of course, remains unchanged, so a valid argument is such that if all the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. An invalid argument is such that all the premises could be true, but the conclusion could be false. And so the way you tell by building a truth table is you gotta know what are the premises, what's the conclusion. And then when you build a table, it always builds the same way in terms of like the rows. The rows, number of rows is the easiest part. It's always 2 to the n, where n is the number of variables. So 2 variable table, 4 rows. 3 variable table, 8, and so on. The columns, well, that's much trickier. There's 1 for each variable. There's 1 for each premise. 1 for the conclusion. Then there's 1 for each simple part, and no repeats. So, as you might imagine, sadly there's no like simple formula like 3 to the z or something. You have to basically know, okay, every variable gets its own column, each premise gets its own column, the conclusion gets a column, and then if you have to break stuff down, each step of simplification gets its own column until you get down to variables, which already have their own columns. And of course, a critical rule is no repeats. So if you end up, with Q, 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 you just need one column. You don't have to have 3 Q columns because they would be identical. Then you build the table, test for validity. So here's what it would look like. We're building the table. Again, the rows is easy. It's always 2 to the n. No mystery there. So we'd have 4 rows, 2 variables, 4 rows. Then each part gets its own place. So premise, conclusion. And then we break things down to the simplest parts. But of course, breaking these down to the simple parts just gives us the variables. So we have all the stuff we need. Then the next step is filling in the t's and f's. And for the variables, it always works the same way. If you have a 2-variable table, it always looks like that. You noted every table we've done with 2 variables looks the same, and that's because that's how it always works. So the mechanics of it is start off to your right, alternating singles, head to the left, alternating doubles, and then you're done. So true, false, true, false, true, true, false, false. Then filling in the rest. Now, in terms of where the rest of the stuff goes, the usual tradition is negated single variables usually live over this way, and then the more complicated things live further down the table. So general rule is simplest things on the left, single variables, and most complicated things to the right. Now, could you put stuff like anywhere you want on the table? In a sense, yeah, if you're careful putting it together, everything ends up, right, then that would be fun. Could be potentially confusing because the convention is variables are here. But as far as the rest of the stuff goes, you could put it anywhere you want. It's just generally easier to have the more complicated stuff further out and then fill it in this way. So for not P, it simply reverses the polarity. True, true, false, false becomes false, false, true, true. Because the negation symbol says, hi there, I'm negation. Whatever I'm negating, simply reverse. True becomes false, false becomes true. Disjunction says, hi there, I'm a disjunction. I'm true when both parts are true. One is true and the other is true. I'm only false when both are false. So true, true, true or true is true. True or false is true. False or true is true. And false or false is false. The conditional says, hi there, I'm a conditional. Unlike the others, the order matters. So the conditional says, hi there, I'm a conditional. Look at my antecedent. Look at my consequent. If my antecedent is true and my consequent is false, I'm false. Otherwise, I'm super true. Now in this case, we've got Q then P. So we don't go with our usual thing, P then Q, because we don't have that. So we look to this column, to this column. So Q to P would be, if Q is true and P is false, this is false. Otherwise true. So true, if true, then true is true. If false, then true is true. If true, then false is false. And if false, then false is true. So the table would be complete. Then the final step is kind of anticlimactic. Because after doing all that, stuff, we just look upon our table and see if we see what we need to see. So what are we looking for? Well, to complete the test, we need to know what our premises are, in this case, P or Q, and not P. And we need to know what our conclusion is, in this case, Q then P, and that tells us where to look. And what we're looking for is this. We go row by row, and we can't do like cross rows like a Connect 4 type of deal, or we have to go row by row. And we're trying to see, could we have a false conclusion, have an F in the conclusion column, and have T's in the columns for all the premises in that row. So we're looking for all true premises, false conclusion. And we find that even once, it's invalid. If we don't, and the table has been done correctly, valid. So going row by row. True premise, false premise, true conclusion, that's okay. True premise, false premise, true conclusion, that's okay. True premise, false, true conclusion, sorry, true premise, false conclusion, ooh, not okay. False premise, true conclusion, that's okay. But all it takes is one to show this is invalid, because we've got the premise being true, conclusion being false. Now, if you want to save milliseconds, one thing you can do is the only rows that matter for testing for validity are ones in which the conclusion is false. Because a row in which the conclusion is true doesn't tell us whether it's valid or invalid. It's only the row in which the conclusion is false that can tell us. And if every row where the conclusion is false, we don't have all true premises, it's fine. If we have a single row with all true premises and a false conclusion, it's invalid. So again, kind of the fast way to do this, which can save entire milliseconds, is just go right to where the conclusion is false and check that. Now we also saw last time the short truth table method, which tries to create a row in which all the premises are true and the conclusion is false. But of course that can become a long cut as opposed to a shortcut. Okay, so that's the stuff. Before ending, anything about any of this stuff, content-wise, grade-wise, or anything at all to do with the class-wise? That needs more stuff. Okay, so what remains is, if you haven't done so already, be sure to complete exam 3, exam 4, quiz and assignments part 4 by April 26th. And again, the best 10 quizzes count out of all the quizzes throughout the entire course, including the STAR survey quiz, and including the syllabus quiz. So if it's a quiz in this class, it is part of the pool. Blackboard automatically keeps the best 10. And again, it doesn't delete them or hide them, so you'll still see them. With the assignments, same deal. There's like 27 assignments. It keeps your best 10. They're 30%. With the exams, it pulls your best 4. And if you look at your overall grade now, and you haven't done exam 3 and 4, your overall grade will look terrible because it's using exam 1 and 2, and it's pulling exam 3 as a 0, exam 4 as a 0, so that would look terrible. And I get a lot of panic emails from people saying, like, I got a terrible grade, what's going on? Well, that's what's going on. It's pulling in those zeros. Now, to see if you need the final, the thing to do, again, is look at your overall grade. If it's an A, you can't get more A than A, so you're done. If it's less than an A, then get the grade estimator, if you wish. Put in your rest of your exams, overall quiz grade, overall assignment grade, hypothetical 100, see if it could do anything. STARS quiz goes in tomorrow. It can only help you. The assessment stuff will go in after the final, as part of the final grades. And if you're doing like an estimate on could the final help you, the assessment stuff can be worth up to 2 overall points in your grade. So if you're doing 100 on the final, plus we get you within 2 points of a letter grade increase, it could be worth doing. The 2 points aren't guaranteed though, but it can't hurt your grade. It either improves it or leaves it the same. But if you're doing your calculations, this will give the definite calculation, and this doesn't go in until everything is over with. But again, it can only help, there won't be any like grade reduction. Your grade can never go down. If it does go down, contact EIT and let me know, because that's not supposed to happen. So have a good rest of your life, and I'll see you on, well, the future, maybe.